We've started our recording, and you'll also, if you need, we've turned on our closed captioning.
Yes, I will.
All right. Hi, everybody. I'll reintroduce myself. My name is Carol Karp. I'm the Executive Director of Sharp Again. Just want to give you a quick program update. Here at Sharp Again, our mission is to educate and empower people to take charge of their cognitive health. We do that through many ways, including webinars like this one, in-person presentations, articles, resources, and a very informative website. But by far, the most impactful offering is our small group coaching program. This program offers live education and support facilitated by a certified health coach. The groups meet via Zoom once a week for 6 weeks. During the small group program, we focus on 4 lifestyle areas which we know greatly affect cognition and which people have control over: stress, sleep, nutrition, and exercise. The cost of the program is $450, but through the generosity of our donors, the price has been reduced to $99. Our next program begins on Tuesday, January 28th, and registration is open. If you're beginning to notice some memory impairment or you want to learn how to keep your brain sharp, this program is an excellent place to start. To learn more, please email us at info@sharpagain.org. Our next webinar in this series is on Tuesday, January 7th at noon. Age Well with a Sharper Brain. Join us to learn about the identifiable causes of memory loss and how you can address them to prevent and slow their effect. You will receive all of our program information in an email tomorrow, along with the recording link and any resources referenced in today's presentation. today's presentation. If you do have any questions during the presentation, please type them into the chat box and we will answer them during the Q&A at the end of the presentation. We would like to note that the information in this presentation is for educational purposes only and does not constitute medical advice. Please see a licensed and qualified medical professional for your medical needs. Now, it gives me great pleasure to introduce our guest speakers today, Dr. Shelby Harris and Steve Ledvina. Dr. Shelby Harris is a licensed psychologist and is board certified in behavioral sleep medicine. She is a clinical associate professor in the Department of Neurology and Psychiatry at Albert Einstein College of Medicine in New York City. She is also the author of The Woman's Guide to Overcoming Insomnia: Get a Good Night's Sleep Without Relying on Medication. Steve Ledvina is a national board certified health and wellness coach focusing on brain health and Alzheimer's prevention. In his coaching practices, Elevate Me Coaching and Knowing Al's, he works with individuals to implement lifestyle changes to prevent dementia, maintain their cognition, and to improve their quality of life. For Sharp Again, he co-founded our small group coaching program, served as chair of our programming committee, and is currently serving as its board chair. Welcome, Dr. Harris and Steve Ledvina, and thank you for joining us.
Thank you.
Carol, you want to take down the deck?
Thanks, Carol. Welcome, everyone. We're really happy to have you, and we're very excited to have Dr. Shelby with us today. I guess just to kick it off, I think everybody probably is feeling it right now. The shift, it happens every year, but I think it's kind of a shock every year when it starts getting darker and you realize it's a little harder to wake up. It's maybe harder to be awake during the day. So Dr. Harris, what impacts a good night's sleep in the winter, and especially right now as we're moving fully into winter?
Well, first of all, thank you everyone for having me here. I was working with this group. So I think there's a few things that factor in. So one is the time change, right? So for a lot of people in a lot of states, there is it's a very harsh reality when in early November, the time changes and it's a drastic fall back. So the sun is going down earlier in general, and then it's a hard adjustment to that sun going down even earlier. So light is a really important thing that helps with energy and keeping our circadian rhythm, our body's sleep-wake cycle in rhythm. So circa about DN a day. And so in the afternoon, it's really, really hard for people to stay awake until a much later bedtime. So we always talk about like trying to make sure that you have enough light in your house, right? That it's also cold in many areas of the country. Like right now, I just want, when we've finished having dinner with my husband, I just want to be on my couch with a heated blanket, keep the lights dim. And that is a recipe for going to bed too early and falling asleep on the couch, which can then worsen our sleep. So really want to think about light during the day, even artificial light in your house in the evening, and then dim it when it's time to go to sleep at night, maybe a half hour before, and then light again in the morning. The beauty of the time change is that now we're starting to get light in the morning a bit easier too. So that's better for our body. So make sure you get that light in the morning, even though you might want to just be in bed cold and kind of warmed up with the blankets.
Do you, along those lines, do you recommend any like tools for bringing that light into our life? I'm thinking things like the light screens that people use for the light therapy for seasonal affective disorder, or like alarm clocks that simulate the sun or anything like that.
Yeah, so there's different like kind of qualities of light, shall we say. So I think if you're someone who it's just dark when you wake up naturally and you want to start getting that light in the morning, you can always start with like there's dawn simulators. Those are things that literally mimic like the sun coming up. So there's ones that are less expensive that you can get online, I think through Philips, that are called like sunrise or dawn simulators. Then there's the really nice, like the hatch alarm is a really nice one that a lot of people use now. My kids both have them. Full disclosure, they were sent to me as a gift, but my kids love them. So that you can then figure out how strong you want the light to come in. And it's really good. Like I have a teenager, so it's a really good thing to have for him, but those are not as bright as like as a light box. So a light box, which they make ones that are really big, they have really portable travel ones, like Philips has travel ones. Those typically, to get the effect for seasonal affective, are usually much brighter. So anywhere from 2,500 lux to upwards of 10,000 lux. And so those are good for people, but you have to be thoughtful about how you're going to use it, when you're going to use it. Make sure you get your eyes checked, because some people actually really shouldn't have it because it can damage their eyes. And you also want to be thoughtful about when you're using it. So you can use it in the morning or in the afternoon for like an hour, even in the early evening. But if you're using it too close to bedtime, that actually can worsen your sleep at night and make you stay up later. So I always say check with your doctor first. But if you really just want to ease into it, a dawn simulator is a good way to ease into the whole world of light.
Awesome. So it's sort of two categories. It sounds like the reinforcing the circadian rhythm with that like easier wake up in the morning, and then the actual like full therapy, which is those are very bright. So I think the really warning bright on the eyes is a good thing for everybody to note if you're doing that. Just But
like the dawn simulators, you don't really, it's not that bright. So you don't really need to get like a full-on eye check for anything.
Right.
But yeah, light therapy, never just try, like people will go and buy light boxes left and right. Don't do it unless you've run it by your doctor first.
How does all of this kind of factor into maybe some of the like sleep chemicals we've heard about, like melatonin or serotonin or even like adenosine?
So melatonin's the biggest one that we will often talk about in the world of like supporting your circadian rhythm, right? So what melatonin is, it's actually naturally made in your brain. It comes out in your brain's pineal gland at night, and we call it the hormone of darkness in sleep medicine. So what happens is if you normally, let's just say, I'm just making up a random person, but if 10 p.m. is your normal sleep time that you fall asleep, your brain naturally starts making melatonin, usually about 2-ish hours before then. So about 8 o'clock, your brain starts to naturally say, okay, we need to start getting ready for sleep. And that melatonin that starts coming out is what actually helps to make you fall asleep and then stay asleep through some of the night. And then about 2 hours before you wake up naturally, let's say you wake up at 6 in the morning, about 4 a.m., your body temperature is actually at its lowest and then starts to rise again. And at that point, the rise in the body temperature says stop producing melatonin. So you actually start to slowly wake up. And then you're awake during the day with very low melatonin levels, and then rinse and repeat the next night. Now, what impacts melatonin? So there's this idea that blue light, screens, things like that can impact melatonin. And yes, it can to some extent, but believe it or not, people make it into a much bigger issue than it actually is. So the studies that were done at Harvard about 15 or so years ago actually only showed a 10-minute delay in sleep when people were looking at an e-reader. So 10 minutes, yet people are buying all these blue blocking glasses and like avoiding. It's really more so about what you're looking at. So people, I mean, more so than often, like people are just on their phone. It's, first of all, it's just bright and it's in their face, right? They're looking at it. So few people actually watch a TV now far away. So they're staring at their phone and then it's like scrolling, or you're binge watching something where it just automatically goes into the next show, or you're just looking at emails or texting. That's the stuff that keeps you awake here and actually keeps you from going to sleep or getting good quality sleep even more so.
Okay. So like if you've got a book light on or something, maybe don't worry about it. But if you've got all the lights on in your house and you're watching news that's getting you worked up, those are the screens that we're worried about.
Yes, it's like be judicious about what you're looking at. And I mean, I'm one of those people that it's like, if you're fine, you're falling asleep okay, and you can put your phone away and then go to sleep okay, and you're getting okay quality, and you don't have to make such a big deal about it. Yeah.
That's a good point. And it's something I see often with my clients. I'm sure you have 1,000 more stories than me, but I think you just hit on one of the tools that I see often, which is just like, listen to your body. How is this, instead of getting caught up in 1,000 levels of optimization, like, is it working or is it not working?
Yeah.
Optimization
is a term that drives me mad nowadays, because in the sleep medicine field, it's interesting. When I first started out in sleep medicine in the early, oh, I see it. We can talk about melatonin supplements. I saw that just popped up. In the early 2000s, people were only talking about sleep disorders. They'd only go see a doctor when they were really having an actual real problem. And then it shifted to like this whole world of like perfection of sleep. And that's the enemy of good, in my opinion. It's like, you're not going to expect perfect sleep every night, but if you're content with how you're sleeping 5 nights a week, you feel like your sleep is generally restorative, don't make a big deal out of it. It's like, you don't have to go and sleep should be cheap. It shouldn't be something you have to spend lots of money on. And then to add to that, the melatonin supplements. So melatonin supplements are a mixed bag. So full disclosure, I work with a company called Natrol. That's an old melatonin or a supplement company. It's been around for a long time and pretty well trusted. But in general, melatonin is not so great for insomnia. So if you have trouble falling asleep, it doesn't work the same way as it would naturally in your brain. What melatonin works really well for, in tiny doses, that's the other thing. People take way too much, 10 milligrams, just because you can buy it. But like, we're talking 3 milligrams or less. When small amounts can help with jet lag, it can help with shift work issues, it can help some very small population of people with their like insomnia, but not as much as people would like to think. And if there's anybody here, we see this a lot in Parkinson's. If there are people who have any, like they act out their dreams in their sleep, melatonin is actually really effective for some of those patients too. So you'd always want to talk with your doctor. But it's not something you just go and take more of and try it out, because it doesn't typically work, or it can have side effects like dizziness, drowsiness during the day.
That's it. I've never heard the Parkinson's piece. That's interesting. And then kind of the general rule for everybody is if you're trying to shift your sleep from what you're normally doing, it sounds like that's maybe the common thread between shift work and jet lag, then melatonin can help initiate it.
So if you're naturally a night owl, you go to bed really late, but you sleep a full night, then we might use tiny bits, but time it much earlier, where you're taking it a few hours before bed, believe it or not, because it shifts your sleep-wake timing. But it's not like if you just are up for 3 or 4 hours in the middle of the night, you can't sleep, it's typically not the most effective treatment to be spending your money on.
does taking melatonin reduce your ability to generate your own melatonin at all, or is that not something we see?
That's something that people like to talk about a lot online. There isn't actually a lot of research.
Okay, interesting. That's good to know. So you're probably not harming yourself necessarily unless you're taking an insane amount, but you're probably not helping unless you're doing one of these sorts of.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And I see the GABA and tryptophan, those supplements, those have even less data behind them than.
Okay. Really closely tied into all of this, and something that's difficult, especially this time of year, for people who are like morning workout type people. It's getting colder, so now it's cold and it's dark. Like how does exercise factor into sleep? And kind of any thoughts on one, the importance of exercise for sleep, but also like how to be generating exercise.
Yeah. So exercise is a really big one. So I always say, if you're not using your battery, sleep at night is like a battery that's recharging. And if you're not using the battery during the day, it doesn't need to recharge as fully at night. So you want to be moving, and that's the other thing with the winter, right? We don't move as much. So we tend to be in hibernation mode a lot of times. So you're not getting any movement or as much movement, steps in, whatever. So that can definitely impact your ability to recharge your battery at night. So exercise, I always say this, but exercise any time of day is good, right? But if you really want to get the most benefit, you can either exercise about 4 to 6 hours before bed. That actually helps with melatonin production, right? So you're warming your body up and then cooling off, because remember, you're cooling off throughout the night. So you're actually helping to enhance that a little bit by exercising. When I say exercise, I'm talking 20 minutes of getting your heart rate up a bit. That's all. It doesn't have to be where you're going all out. The other benefit, it can help with sleep at night. You can exercise in the morning too. I personally only exercise pretty much right when I get up in the morning, but that's all because that's all I have time to do. I can't do it in the afternoon. That's good because it helps to keep that body clock in check in the morning. So it can help where you're getting light exposure, you're moving, and it can just help with falling asleep at night and staying asleep and keeping your circadian rhythm in check. But if you have any insomnia and you have the ability to kind of time out when you want to exercise, ideally, try 20 minutes, but do it that 4 to 6 hour range before bed and see how that works.
Mm-hmm. So that hits on one thing there, which is talk to me a little bit about the other parts of our routine. You kind of hit on exercise can be a really good part of the routine to start cementing that circadian rhythm every day. Are there other pieces of our routine we should be paying attention to?
Yeah, for sure. So like, yes, I drink coffee. I am a sleep specialist and I drink coffee. There's nothing wrong with having a cup or two of coffee in the morning. That's fine. So be thoughtful about when you're drinking your coffee, right? So if you're having that. So I typically always have a cup when when I first get up in the morning. Think about when you eat your meals. Now it's unrealistic to be perfect with the timing of it every day, but generally I always eat breakfast around the same time, lunch around the same time, dinner within an hour of the same time. So that helps to set that rhythm. The other thing that's really important that there was a consensus statement that came out in the Journal of Sleep Health within the past year, I want to say. It actually showed that what was more important for sleep health overall was consistency with your timing of bed and wake time, believe it or not, more so than the amount of sleep's important, but the consistency with when you actually go to bed and wake up is much more important for health outcomes. So what that means is that you want to generally within about an hour, hour and a half, go to bed around the same time. And you want to wake up at the same time. So that in and of itself, if you have that structure, that can help align the structure with exercise, with movement, getting some light exposure. I think light exposure in the morning, trying to get as much light as you can during the day. Like I'm lucky in that I have my desk in my home office in front of a window. So I'm always getting light, even on a dim day, I'm getting it in my face. And then at lunchtime, if you can, try to sit by a window. If it's not cold where you are, go sit outside for 20 minutes. That light in the afternoon can help with that post-lunch dip. If you're someone who wants to nap and you don't find that napping impacts your sleep at night, a 20-minute nap in the afternoon, doing that around the same time when you can is helpful. So it's doing those things at around the same time within an hour, especially the sleep-wake timing, can really help to set that rhythm.
That's super helpful and very interesting. Do you have any sense of what the mechanism, like why would having such a strong rhythm be more valuable for health outcomes than total sleep?
Well, it's not, I don't want people to think that total sleep is not important. But what
Right.
happens is when you lose the consistency of your sleep-wake timing, that can actually make it harder to achieve the duration of sleep that you want to be getting.
Gotcha. Okay.
So
It's a
that's the
good.
thing. I always say quality over quantity first for everyone. I want to work on getting the same-ish sleep-wake timing, getting better quality. Then we work on trying to get more of it.
Perfect. Is there another kind of question we had come up is there an optimal room temperature? Should we be keeping the window open in the winter? Is anything kind of
Yeah.
around that?
It really does vary. So you'll see online, people will say get 67 degrees. That's actually not true. So it's anywhere typically in Fahrenheit around in the 60s, upwards of 72. 72 is pushing it. Now, that being said, no windows open in Minnesota in the winter. I get that. That being said, you have to think about where you are in the country, right? So the 67 degrees that people often talk about, it really varies. Like 67 degrees in Florida with that humidity is going to feel very different from 67 degrees without humidity. So that's why we don't really try to focus on that so much, but somewhere in the 60s to upwards of 72. Now, there's not one thing that works for everyone either. So you want to keep it cool at night. The reason being, like I was saying, is that your body actually craves, I would say, like a pretty cave, quiet, dark, cool, and comfortable. Caves are not typically comfortable, but you want to make it quiet, dark, and cool so that you can make your body temperature go down with the melatonin. Now, the cool temperature, one person might really only do well with 70 degrees, whereas their significant other or someone in their house might do better with like 65. So you could open windows, you could use a fan. I always sleep year round. I have a ceiling fan on in my room. There's really great tech. So you can get cooling pillows, cooling mattress pads. There's really, I mean, it's very expensive, but there's things like 8 Sleep and Ooler and all these different brands. I don't work with any of those companies, but you can set an app and it will cool down as the night goes on and then start to warm up in the morning. And you can get it for one side of the bed, both can tailor it. So that's actually a really nice option for some people. And then one other thing I recommend too for people, if you don't want to go that expensive route, just get 2 different comforters. One heavy, like twin extra long comforters, a heavy one for your side if you want it cool, if you're cold at night, and a lighter one for the other side. It's not pretty, but then get a coverlet and put it over, and then you're fine.
Yeah, that's great advice. The cheap solution comforters, if you want to go full out, one of the sleep mats.
Right. We've
And
got so many options.
as we've heard with several things already today, the
Yeah.
tool you need to use is listen to your body. Are you too hot? Going to bed, that sort of thing.
Yeah, I always caution people to be wary of when people speak in absolutes about stuff. So, because what works for one person's body might not be ideal for that other person's body. So you just got to see what works for you using the guidelines that we try to put out there.
Speaking of another metric, I saw Carol asked in this, and I know there's been a decent amount of news recently about the maybe gender differences in sleep requirements, but like what is a good amount of sleep to be getting per night?
So I'll talk about the gender difference thing because that's another big thing. Generally, it's between there. So where people get 8 from is just because it's literally in between. So most people fall between 6 to 9 hours a night. So that 8 is literally because they're getting 7.5 and they're rounding up a little bit. That's it. That's it. So it's not about 8. It's what we find. My actual dissertation 20 plus years ago was on this topic with older adults. So we found that when people sleep less than 6 or more than 9, that's when you tend to get more issues. So if you're in that range and you're feeling well rested, refreshed, you might have dips during the day here and there, you're fine. That being said, there are some people that do better on the lower end and some people that need actually more. So if you're kind of on those outliers, then you might want to talk with your doctor, but it's go by how you're feeling. Now, the women versus men thing, there's been a lot of like social media stuff going around that's actually totally wrong.
Okay.
So this idea that women need hours more is completely false. In case anybody ever talks to you about that, women typically need get about 10 or need 10 to 15 minutes more a night than men. It's not like I've seen rates of like people saying that women need 9 to 10 hours a night. That's not true. It's 10 to 15 minutes more. And what's different is that women tend to sleep a bit deeper than men. Now, the one wrench that gets thrown into the whole thing is that women tend to have more issues with restless leg syndrome and insomnia. So even though they could sleep a bit more if they were able to, they have all these other sleep disorders that makes it harder for them to actually sleep more.
So that brings up kind of an interesting question in my mind of when we're talking about that, any of the hours that you just talked about, are we talking time in bed or are we talking time actually asleep and we should be removing sort of like maybe that 20 minutes we woke up in the middle of the night well
Yeah, I mean,
from our
it's typically when we say total sleep time, we're talking about the time generally throughout the night. So you're taking out those 20 minutes, but for most people, if they're sleeping okay, we don't make such a big deal about 20 minutes. If it's hours, then that's a bigger issue that we
Right.
want to, but generally it's everyone wakes up throughout the night. Everyone wakes up 4 to 7 times at night. It's just we don't remember most of the awakenings. So you don't even factor that sort of stuff in. The other thing that's a little different that I didn't mention here is for older adults tend to get a bit less sleep, but it's not that you need less sleep. The difference is that they nap more during the day. So when you look at it in a 24-hour period, they're actually getting the same amount of sleep as they did when they were younger. Typically, it's just less at night because they're getting more during the day.
It's an interesting piece of the puzzle that I didn't understand about that research.
There you go.
One of the aspects we haven't talked about with this is stress. So is there, stress, both chronic stress and, acute day-to-day stress can have a big factor on sleep. Is there any tools you'd recommend, maybe like over the long term, but also just right before you go to bed to kind of get ourselves into a productive sleep state?
Yeah. So the first thing I always like to stress is that stress is normal. Like we all have stress in our lives, time to time, sometimes more than other times. It is also normal to have a bad night or two here and there because of stress. Like to expect yourself to sleep perfectly through every single night is unrealistic. I'd love to meet that person that can just conk out immediately if they've like gotten, God forbid, bad news an hour before bed, right? But it's more of when we look at poor sleep, we're looking at, are you having multiple nights of bad sleep that's going on for a few weeks? That's when we start wanting to say, okay, maybe we need to figure out what's going on here and address the stress even more in depth.
Right.
So if you're someone who just occasionally tends to have some stressful nights, but you want to do whatever you can, first of all, normalize it for yourself, because the more you freak out about it, the more you're not going to sleep. So then on top of that, it really varies upon the person. Like sometimes for me, what I like to do, honestly, in like at 2 hours before bed, I love to bake. And that to me is super stress relieving. So I often will make bread. I like to make bread. I like to make challah. I make like whatever I can. I like to decorate cakes, but like there's something about kneading bread for me. The physical aspect is very relaxing for me. I also love to run. So I tend to exercise for stress relief during the day. I don't do it right before bed though. Other things that for me are just calming, and some patients love these things. Some people are like, I'm not making bread, 2 hours before bed. For me, there's something like I was saying about earlier, just sitting on my couch with a cup of decaf tea and like my heated blanket and just like that physical sensation of just melting into my couch is very relaxing for me. Sometimes finding a show that you really like it's really a little bit of trial and error. Reading for some people, coloring. I have patients that love to knit or do needlepoint. It's finding something, meditation, whatever works for you that calms you down. Now, if you're always having to rely on those things, then it's figuring out what are some bigger stress relief techniques. One of my favorite ones, so exercise is a huge stress reliever. But one of my favorite things that people don't always think about is just meditation, mindfulness meditation. It doesn't have to be 20 minutes twice a day. It could be 5 minutes of just having a moment where those 5 minutes where you're picking an app, or you're just, I usually look outside and do a meditation every morning. I look outside for 2 minutes. Actually, I only do 2 minutes. I observe and describe what I see on the leaves and the trees outside my house. And when my brain starts saying, I have a million other things to do, why? No, let it go. Just back on this. No, let it go, back on this. We make meditation out to be a much more complicated thing than it needs to be. But the more that you get practice a few minutes of just being mindful, letting your brain wander and getting back on track, the easier it gets when you're stressed down the road to be able to say, let it go, just let it go. Focus on my reading, let it go. I'm going to focus on my breathing to go to bed. Meditation practice is the sort of thing where you don't get the benefit right off the bat. You have to be doing it for a month, 2 months, but with regular practice, you get much better at letting go of those busy thoughts.
Yeah. And, the mindfulness, right? When you're trying to go to bed, the thoughts that you're coming in that don't let you go to sleep, the mindfulness is going to help.
Exactly. But everyone tries to do it, mindfulness meditation. Like there's all the apps have like sleep meditations. Those are fine, but they're really not meditation practice. Meditation is not meant to be you're not supposed to fall asleep while meditating. You're not actually getting the practice out of it. I always say when you're practicing a mindfulness meditation during the day, it's like a strength training for your brain's mental muscle. So every time you wander and get back on track, it's like you're doing a rep for your brain of strength training. Doing it at night when you're falling asleep is like you're falling asleep while weightlifting. That's not going to help getting strength out of it. So you can do it at night, but you're not actually practicing mindfulness.
So along these lines, I love the idea, again, if everybody's getting any message from this, it's like, listen to your body, find what calms you down. The goal is to be getting calmed down before we sleep. What do you think about all, okay, if you're baking bread, are you listening to a podcast, or are you, like doing it silently? I'm just curious. There's so many opportunities for us to be filling our brains with as much information as possible right up until that moment we go to bed.
I think it really depends on the day, honestly, and the person that I'm working with. Like I am a big fan of trying to, a lot of people talk about an hour before bed to like create a buffer so that you're winding your brain down. Wind down time is important, but I don't think we need an hour of just like emptying our brain and just doing deep breathing. I think that's also not realistic for a lot of people, honestly. So I like to have at least a 10 to 20 minute buffer before going to bed where I do something. I read in my bed for like 10 minutes, 15 minutes. I'll do that before I go to bed. If I am feeling like I just am keyed up and I want something to distract, then I'm going to bake, I don't know, or listen to something. It really does vary on where I am, but I do always try to protect a little bit of time before bed to empty my brain out a little bit.
Yeah, sense. Do you have any additional sort of maybe like lifestyle thoughts about sleep before I kind of move the conversation into more like sleep issues? I see somebody already commenting about sleeping pills, so maybe we'll move a little in that direction.
But lifestyle, I think, cool, quiet, dark, comfortable. If you think about those things, that's a great place to start. And then if that's not enough, then we start thinking about sleep disorders.
So I think the best way to start is right there, which is, how do you even know, like when should I actually be worried about sleep? You sort of said earlier, one night of sleep here and there, that's the most normal thing. If you have a stressful period of your life and you have sleep disrupted, that's even kind of makes sense. If it lasts too long, then start to get, pay a little more attention to it. What are there other metrics or?
Yes. There are 3 kind of metrics that I like to go by. So one is the sleep duration. So if you feel like you're just not getting at least 3 nights a week routinely, you're not getting as much sleep as you used to, or you feel like you're definitely just not getting enough sleep and it's not helping you, that might be, if that's been going on for a few weeks, definitely talk with your doctor, because that might be insomnia potentially. Then the next part to think about, so instead there's duration, then there's quality. So are you sleeping a full night many nights, but still feel like the quality of your sleep is suffering? Like you're just not, you're waking up and you could go right back to sleep, or you're feeling like you're dragging through the day and you don't feel like your sleep's restorative. If that's been going on and you made like lifestyle changes, I forgot to mention like alcohol, caffeine, right? So like limiting alcohol within 3 hours of bed, and you're limiting caffeine within 8 to 12 hours of bed. And you're not taking any significantly sedating medications like NyQuil or ZQuil or anything like that. If you're not doing that stuff and you're still feeling like your sleep's not restorative, then after maybe 2 weeks of trying to keep things consistent, talk with your doctor if it's still a problem. And then the third thing is the timing. So if you find that you can sleep a full night but it's just not on the timing, the clock that you'd like. So maybe you're a real night owl. We see this in older adults a lot, that they're falling asleep a lot earlier, 7, 8 o'clock at night, waking up at 2 or 3 in the morning. So they become extreme early birds. So if you feel like the sleep you're getting is not on the clock you want, then, or the timing, that's when you would talk to your doctor. So that can kind of guide, if you can keep notes on that stuff, that would guide you a little bit about where you want to go for treatment.
Okay, so try and pull all the basic levers first. Make sure there's not some obvious thing like alcohol right before bed or a cup of coffee, at 7 p.m.
And I'm a fan of, I'm pretty old school, so I like hardcore, like paper, like diaries. So I have on my website, drshelbyharris.com, you can go to the National Sleep Foundation. There's tons of sleep diaries, and they're just nice and succinct. So they'll tell you, oh, am I napping during the day? Am I using alcohol? What time am I going to bed? And that will just help you to track it. You can use the rings and the watches, but honestly, sometimes they are not so accurate. And they can also make people hyper-focused on their sleep. So that's not always the best thing. So if you do an old school paper and pen kind of diary for a week or two, it might highlight some of those issues that we just talked about, and you can make those changes, see if it changes stuff. If not, you talk to your doctor, and guess what? You can go to your doctor and say, I have a few weeks of a sleep diary I've been recording. So here you go. So you've even got the data to go in there with.
That's wonderful advice, and I'm so glad to hear you say it, because I say that to my clients all the time. The paper, you can spend lots of money on like the Oura Ring or the watches, all those sorts of things, and they are, I've gotten value from them. But a piece of paper and a pencil costs you $0, and you're going to learn a lot about your sleep just by thinking and reflecting on it.
Right. Remember, I also deal with people who have pretty entrenched insomnia, and there's actually research, we call it orthosomnia, where people are hyper focused on the trackers, and it's not always the most accurate for some people, and then it actually makes them more anxious about their sleep and can guide how they're going to feel about their day. So if you find that you're one of those people, then just try not to use those things and just go old school paper and pen.
Which leads us pretty nicely into, okay, let's say we've sort of have a problem, we're having that conversation with our doctor, like, you as an expert, which directions should we be steering the conversation? Should, CBTI, sleeping pills, like what are kind of like good sleep treatment outcomes in your mindset?
Yeah. So if we're talking about insomnia, so trouble falling asleep, staying asleep, you're waking up earlier than you want, multiple nights a week for a few weeks on end, at least. The gold standard treatment for insomnia is called cognitive behavior therapy, like you said, CBT for insomnia. So that's like what my area of specialty is. It's not fine, but what it is it's about changing the timing of sleep-wake patterns. So sometimes people they're in bed too many hours for what their body's actually giving them. Sometimes it's about the worries about sleep, trying to force sleep to happen. What are you doing in bed at night if you can't sleep? So we're changing those things, and I tailor it to that person. There are some people who will sell like packages. I don't love the packages so much because you're not getting it tailored to yourself as much. But that's really what CBTI is. Now, CBT for insomnia works just as well, if not better, than the medication. So we know that the rates are about the same as Ambien, but where CBTI works better is it works in the long run. When someone stops taking sleeping pills, guess what? They don't sleep as well. When you stop doing CBTI in short term, like I see people generally between 3 to 8 sessions for the vast majority of people. And I don't even see them weekly. I see them every few weeks. So CBTI, when they stop with me, they typically keep sleeping better because they know what to do. Meds teach you that. Now, meds, the other thing is meds can have side effects for some people. CBTI can make people sleepy at the beginning, but the meds can have a longer term side effects. It can be problematic for older adults, especially. So we really just try, it doesn't mean that you shouldn't take sleep aids, sleeping pills, but we really try not to start there. So we'd rather try with a few months of trying something that's more evidence-based long-term, that's less harmful in the long term, and then move to sleep aids if we have to. Now, all that being said, there are other things that can be going on. So we see a lot of times we'll see sleep apnea, so snoring, choking, gasping. A lot of women have it who don't have any clue that they would have potentially sleep apnea. The rates go up once you hit menopause. We see that a lot. Men and women equal at that point in life, and you don't have to be overweight or obese or an older male to have apnea. It can hit anybody. So sometimes pauses in your breathing, snoring, choking, gasping, it might not be obvious. Those are things we want to look at too. So there's a lot of different sleep disorders we want to look at, especially if you're not responding fully to insomnia treatments.
Well, so what would make you worried enough about sleep apnea if you maybe don't know if there's a significant percentage of, especially it sounds like women who wouldn't know they have it? What should we use as a metric
Yeah,
to have
that's a
that
great
conversation
question.
with our
There's
doctor?
a few things. So if you're just not sure, if you don't notice if you're snoring at night or you have any pauses or you're waking up with a dry mouth, like those are all things that you'd want to say, okay, maybe something's going on. And you can often, mind you can have insomnia and sleep apnea at the same time and treat both things. I do that all the time. But if you think that you're just not getting good quality sleep, that might be a sign. Also, another thing to think about too is like, the level of sleepiness you're having during the day. So if you're someone who finds that you're napping a good amount more than you had in the past, if you find that you can't get through the day without multiple naps, yes, we do find in older adults they have more naps, but if you find that you definitely need a nap and you find that whatever sleep you get is just not refreshing, even if it's one of the nights where you didn't have as much insomnia, then you definitely want to talk with your doctor. Those like that level of sleepiness, dragging often can be a sign of sleep apnea in some people.
And, do you think are the at-home sleep tests, kind of the best option forward for somebody who's worried about that after they maybe talk with their primary care?
Yeah, so at-home sleep tests are a good starting point if they're just looking for like insomnia or no, sorry, sleep apnea, which is what they usually are doing first and foremost. So they're actually a good starting point. And honestly, in most cases, insurance is only going to pay for that right off the bat. So there can be other sleep disorders that apnea can worsen. So like sleepwalking, sleep talking. So they're not going to do an in-lab study with all the wires when if you just have sleep apnea, they can find that in a home sleep study. So now a home test. There's different types out there. There's the chest band one with like a little pulse ox and has a little nasal cannula. Then there's ones called a watch pap, or literally just a watch that's disposable and a finger sensor. Though home sleep apnea tests or home sleep studies are really just breathing sensors. That's what most of them are, most of them. So they're looking at how well you're breathing. They're not actually looking at your sleep. So they're testing how you're breathing. Now, if it shows that you are positive for sleep apnea on there, you can be pretty certain you have sleep apnea. If it comes back negative, you can't be 100% certain that you don't have it. So you can have like 5 to 10% of the time there can be false negatives, but almost always if it's positive, we know it's positive. So it's a good screener initially. And then if it's still negative and you think something else is going on, then they might do an in-lab.
That's great. I guess in a couple minutes, we'll open up to questions to everybody, but with the time of year and kind of the theme of this, maybe it's worth talking about some of these like more seasonal things. Yeah. Like we're all traveling a lot. Do you have anything you would recommend around shifting time zones, even if it's 2 hours, but up to 6 if somebody's going overseas?
It's so challenging because I get asked that all the time.
I'm sure.
What direction and where from? It's like,
yeah, exactly.
It's a little challenging. If you're flying, I always encourage people to like try and just not have alcohol on the plane. Try and if you're going to be sleeping and it's an overnight flight, like bring your own like neck pillow. I sometimes bring my own blanket. Like I'm that person. Make it as comfortable. Eye mask, like whatever you can to make it as comfortable and lay back as possible. Hydrate on the plane. Like try to really get as much of that as you can. There's a really wonderful app that's called Time Shifter. So if you really are traveling far, that will help you with understanding sometimes even melatonin. It'll tell you when to take melatonin if you want to. Light exposure, when it should be dark and light, and all these things to shift your schedule so that it's not as abrupt. So that's always a good thing. Naps can happen. It'll tell you when you can nap, when you can't. If you're just driving somewhere, even if you're flying, but you really want to try and you're not going too far, I bring my own pillow. Like it's like such a silly little thing, but whenever I go to like visit my parents and 3 hours away, I bring my pillow because it just helps me to sleep a little bit better. And one little pro tip is to put a different color pillowcase on your pillow if you normally have white sheets, because you will forget it in your bed. So put a really bright colored pillowcase on that pillow so you won't forget it when you leave. So there
That
you
is
go.
a good tip. That's a good tip.
Yeah.
And we've mentioned it a few times, but we haven't kind of specifically zeroed in on it. Huge part of kind of the holiday experience, whether you're going to parties or, just gathering with family, is alcohol.
Mhm.
What should we, you already mentioned the 3 hours before bed, but sort of, does that have a number of drinks, that sort of thing?
No, I always said like one glass of wine, for example. You want to really try to limit what I mean, like try to 1 or 2 glasses of whatever, but try to stop it within 3 hours of bed. So the reason being is that it might help you fall asleep, but the quality of the sleep you're going to get is crummy. So really try to limit it. I mean, I don't expect people to be perfect all the time. The exception, not the norm, right? So once in a while, if you're out at a party and you're having it later, just know that that night might not be as good, but really try to limit it within 3 hours and like 1 or 2 max.
One hack, I guess I'll put out there for everybody that I've started using in my own life is the non-alcoholic options. The non-alcoholic beers and even like liquors and things have come a long way, and so you can still get the social benefit of if all the people you love are sitting around and having a chit chat over a glass of something, you can still do that, but you can remove the alcohol from your situation. Probably get as much joy with none of the sleep
Yeah,
issues from the alcohol.
that's a great point. Yeah.
All
So
right.
I just want to add to this mouth taping thing on here because I see
Yeah.
some. I'm glad that helped you, person, but
Perfect.
do not start mouth taping unless you have talked with your doctor first, because if you have apnea, and there's different severities of apnea, and everyone has different anatomies. If you start to tape your mouth and you haven't actually been properly evaluated for apnea, you can actually, for some people, it can make them have more obstructions in their breathing. So it's not actually fixing the apnea, it's just fixing any snoring that might be so obvious you're not breathing through your mouth. So yes, mouth taping can be okay for some people, but it is by no means an actual treatment for sleep apnea. So I'm glad that it helped this person, but I don't want people just like taping their mouths left and right, because it really is not a treatment if there is sleep apnea going on.
Feel free to chime in with new questions. I'm noticing one. Oh, here we go. Yeah, breathe right strips. Anything around that? And is there any of those solutions that we can walk into a drugstore and that's actually going to work? Is maybe the broad version of these.
Oh, if you're someone who has occasional breathing issues at night, a breathe right strip, fine. If it's like mild enough, some snoring. But if you're really routinely snoring, like you might want to talk with your doctor. So like these things, if it was as easy as breathe right strips for most people, like we wouldn't have these apnea CPAPs and all this sort of stuff, unfortunately. So I always caution people, talk with your doctor first. And if there's nothing else significant going on, they might say, okay, try the breathe right strips. And for some people it can help, but most people it's not enough. D3 and apnea, I don't know that one at all. So sorry, not so much.
Yeah, it's no vitamin D connection.
Okay. Not my area of specialty by far, but I haven't heard anything, but maybe I just don't know. Sorry.
Sure. I saw somebody
there is. Okay. Well, okay.
I saw somebody ask earlier about diurnal, nocturnal. Let's see, maybe I need to read this more closely. I guess that was just a comment, not so much a question.
Oh, humans are designed to receive natural sunlight signals from natural sundown, and so don't vary by 2 hours. Yeah, I mean, that's kind of it. Yeah. It, like I was saying, when you're sleeping outside of when you're changing the timing, it makes it harder to get the actual duration of sleep that you want, partially because you're going to bed when the sun is out, or you're waking up when the sun is out more, and it can make it harder overall. Yeah.
You know, one piece of this that we really didn't touch on at all is diet. How does diet connect into sleep? Should we be watching sugar before bed in the same way of alcohol or anything?
I mean, sugar is kind of a tough one. I think typically when people are having more sugar, it's not ideal. And some people, we always think about any sort of insulin resistance issues, that sort of stuff that's happening as well. So it's something to try and limit as much as you can, but it's not, I will say that like cutting out sugar altogether within a certain number of hours of bed is not like a standard treatment for insomnia. But it's always a good thing to try and limit as much as possible.
Sure. Does anybody have any additional questions? Otherwise, I think we can move to wrap it up on time.
I'm going to look in the D3 and apnea thing. I'm not, apnea treatment specifically is not what I do day in, day out. I do much more stuff. So I'm curious about that. I send people more for apnea evals. So I'm going to look into that. Oh,
there we go. There's a resource. There's a start on the hunt.
Okay.
Well, thank you so much. This has been a wonderful conversation. I think
Thank you.
I'm sure everybody got a ton out of it. Do you want maybe take a second to tell us all the places? I know you are out in the world in a number of different ways. So I think if people are curious, where else can they find you and more information that you there?
So you can always look at my book, right? So if you know anyone who's struggling with insomnia, it's more of a workbook. Then I have my website, which I think was put on there earlier. So Shelby.harris.com. And then I also do a lot of stuff on Instagram. So if anybody's on Instagram, it's just Sleep Doc Shelby. So I do a lot of kind of myth busting, a lot of like trying to get people in the direction of the proper treatments, more so than like the stuff that doesn't have really much data behind it. So
I will include all of that information in the recap email that goes out tomorrow, along with the recording link.
great.
Well, thank you so much, Dr. Harris. We really appreciate it. This has been wonderful. And thank you, everybody, for joining us today.
Thank you so much. Happy holidays, everyone.
Happy holidays.
Bye.
Thank you.
Bye.
I'm going to stop the recording here. If I could find it.